Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
So let's just jump right into it. We're going to be talking about supporting unaccompanied youth in housing. These are some of the topics we're going to go over today. I'll just ground us in some fair housing basics. We have lots of other fair housing presentations on our website. If you want to dive further into those basics, there's more information at fhca.org. We'll talk about state and federal statistics around unaccompanied youth and unhoused youth. We'll talk about the laws that pertain to this group, both state and federal laws. We'll talk about some of the barriers that exist for unaccompanied youth and unhoused youth and how to advocate for them. And addressing this issue moving forward, right? So I'm guessing some of you are probably already involved in this work, know a little bit about those barriers that exist, why they exist, and some of the preventions and things we can do to address the issue moving forward. To some folks, it might be new, so we're just going to try to cover the whole gambit today. All right. So Fair Housing Council of Oregon is a statewide civil rights organization. We proactively promote housing justice, equity, and inclusion. This picture is from one of our poster competitions. We have one every year. School kids, first grade through eighth, can submit their design. And the grand prize winner's design gets blown up onto a poster, and then that poster gets distributed around the state, and housing providers like property management companies can put those up in their office. So this is just one of those winners, I think from 2 years ago now, 1 or 2 years ago now. So we have an education and outreach department. That's where Glenda and I get to work. And then we also have an enforcement department. And what they do is they directly advocate for folks who are experiencing discrimination in housing based on their protected class identity. And we'll go over who those groups are here in just a moment. We also have a public policy department. So we do some advocating at that level and kind of talk to lawmakers and other groups who are also doing that work and try to, push forward the laws that are going to support all these groups moving forward in housing to make it fair and equitable for everybody. All right, so what is the Fair Housing Act? It's a set of civil rights laws, and what they do is they promote equal access in housing. They make it illegal for landlords and housing providers to discriminate against groups based, again, on their protected class identity, and we'll go over who those groups are. They also make it illegal for cities and counties to limit housing choice or segregate communities based on protected class. So it kind of like touches different areas, like in private housing, and then also some jurisdictions do have responsibilities under the Fair Housing Act as well. And what is fair housing? It's the right of all people to be free from illegal discrimination in the rental, sale, or financing of housing. And sorry, I'm going to pop backwards real quick. Yeah, okay. So let's talk a little bit about who these protected classes are. The first 4 protected classes were added during the civil rights movement. Those groups are race, color, national origin, and religion. So those were the first 4, but then the law evolved over time and more groups were added. So with the women's rights movement, sex was added as a protected class. Also now under that protected class, we also have victims of domestic violence, sexual orientation, and gender identity as well. In the 80s, familial status was added. So that's people raising kids under the age of 18, and disability as well was added in the 1980s. So what this means is basically anywhere you go in the country, it's illegal for housing providers to say, I'm not going to rent to you because you belong to one of these groups, or to give unequal terms and conditions and those kinds of things. Then certain states have additional protections that exist. So it just depends on where you are. Oregon has a few. Oregon includes marital status. So it doesn't matter if you're single, married, divorced, your marital status shouldn't come into question when you're going into a housing transaction. Source of income is protected here in Oregon. So those are things like rental subsidies and some other subsidies as well, like Section 8 or housing choice vouchers are protected. So technically it's illegal in Oregon for housing providers to say, no, we don't accept those. Other agency rent payments count, nonprofit payments count. We have temporary assistance for needy families, SSI and SSD up here too. So what that means is all of those kinds of income should count to qualify for rental housing under the criteria of that, usually you make 3 times the amount of rent. Those should be included in that calculation. And again, sexual orientation and gender identity are up here. Oregon was a little ahead of the game. We added those as protections before the federal government did. And then also some cities and counties add additional protections. So depending on where you live, there could be more. Some cities that have colleges will go on to add things like age over 18, because some housing providers will say, oh, you have to be 22 and up to rent here, which means that students, college students have a hard time finding housing in those cities. So the cities will be like, nah, you can't do that. You can say you have to be 22 and up to live here so that college students still have housing choice and they have options in those cities. So I actually have a great chart of those on our website. There's a little search button at the top, and if you put in protected classes or protected class charts on our website, you can find that chart on there and see all the protections that are in Oregon cities and counties. So fair housing laws apply to dwellings, and it sounds kind of like, okay, that's a no-brainer, but the reason why we go over this is because our definition of a dwelling could be different than yours, and it could be different than other entities. So the Department of Housing and Urban Development give us some clear guidelines about what counts as a dwelling under the law. So it could be houses, it could be apartments, regardless of the number of units. Here in Oregon, at least, that's true. It could be condos or floating homes, mobile homes, retirement housing and assisted living, nonprofit housing, shelters, and transitional housing. A lot of shelters do fall under fair housing law. Dorm rooms, college housing, youth housing, and possibly motel rooms. If folks are staying in hotels for extended periods of time, they're there, like, for example, I live in Jackson County. There was a big fire that came through years ago now, and folks are still living in hotel rooms. At that point, it starts to fall under fair housing because it's somebody's permanent, long-term dwelling at that point. So it could start to be covered depending on how long someone's there. And who has to comply with fair housing law? The short answer is most people who touch the housing market. So it really is pretty vast. And so it could be owners and landlords, property managers, maintenance staff, homeowners associations, some shelters and residential programs, like I mentioned, possibly those hotels, vacation rentals. Again, if they're hosting longer term stays, real estate agents, mortgage lenders, and financial institutions. So the folks who are involved in the sale of homes and financing. Some cities and counties, they'll have responsibilities too. Advertising media. Sometimes people are like, why is this on here? It's because advertising can be discriminatory. Sometimes we hear about, like, for example, here in Oregon, if they say no Section 8, that's discriminatory advertising. No kids, right? That could be discriminatory advertising. Active and healthy seniors wanted. Ooh, that could really create a barrier, right? Make you feel like you're not welcome there. So those kinds of things could be considered discriminatory advertising. Insurance, there's some crossover there, and neighbors. If neighbors are living in the same property, they have the same housing provider or landlord. The housing provider has to stop discrimination if one neighbor is discriminating against another based on their protected class identity. There's a whole lot more to that story, though. So again, if you want to learn more, I encourage you to contact us, and we'll be happy to direct you to more information on some of this info. So let's pop into talking about unaccompanied youth and unhoused youth. So there's not a clear definition for unhoused youth, which kind of creates some confusion. There's the multiple definitions that exist federally and through the state and different laws kind of create a little bit of gray area, right? Because different parameters are used, different age groups are used, and it makes it really hard to get a clear understanding of how many youth are unhoused because the numbers kind of get mixed up in that way. The federal government has at least 3 separate interpretations. Actually, there might be more than that. And Oregon has its own laws and policies that define unaccompanied and homeless youth based on their age. But again, they use different parameters. So the takeaway here is that it's hard to get a real clear picture of how many unhoused and unaccompanied youth there are, both in the state and federally. So this is an Oregon revised statute that I thought was important to bring up. It kind of crosses over between unhoused youth and the school systems. So it says a school district shall not exclude from admission a child located in the district solely because the child does not have a fixed place of residence or solely because the child is not under the supervision of a parent, guardian, person in a parental relationship. So basically the schools need to be providing equal education despite if a kid is, with a parent or not, or if they're housed or not. These are some numbers we thought it would be, important to bring up, especially because it can be hard to get more current stats about, who's unhoused in our state, but the McKinney-Vento program is actually reporting pretty regularly. And so these are some of the information from the school districts that was reported just in 2022 and 2023 school year. So there are over 16,000 unhoused youth that are doubled up. So they're living, together in other people's houses more than normally live in one household. 1,400, a little over, are living in motels and hotels. 2,218 are in the shelter programs. 2,818 were reported as unsheltered altogether. So maybe living in encampments or other places. Maybe in cars, that kind of thing. And then of all of these housing options are included here, but for unaccompanied youth, there's a total of 3,496. And it's important to note that these numbers are likely a lot higher than what we're seeing here, because these are just youth who are engaged in the school system or other programs that the McKinney-Vento program kind of oversees. So we get all kinds of different reporting that's coming out. And there's likely more. And also occasionally, sometimes they're counted twice, just depending on if they're engaged with multiple programs that are counting, but which is where it gets kind of muddy, like I said at the beginning. That there could be some crossover there. It makes it hard to get a clear picture. Another stat that we thought was interesting, that in 2021, the Oregon Department of Human Services estimated that there were over 8,200 unhoused individuals under the age of 25 who are likely to need safe, affordable housing services to maintain stability. So this one, I don't know, is there anyone from CSH here? No, not in the room today. Okay, I met them earlier. So the Corporation of Supportive Housing partnered up with the Oregon Department of Human Services in 2021. And they did a statewide analysis that examined the need for housing services for youth experiencing homelessness. And it's a cool report. I recommend checking it out. It's very long. There's all kinds of good info in there. But we pulled out some of the points that seemed poignant and important we wanted to bring up. So what they did during this report was they partnered with unhoused youth. They got folks with lived experience regionally to come in and work with them to do the report, to get the information. And what was identified is that many of the regions said that they needed outreach and youth drop-in centers because none exist in a lot of places, especially in the rural communities. Some of those youth said that they were having to hitchhike long distances just to find a place to sleep. It was also reported that a lot of the programs that already exist were not actually meeting their needs. They had time requirements that didn't make sense for what was going on in their lives, or some of the barriers maybe were too high for them to use those services. And this is the chart that they came up with. They said, to these groups that they were working with, experts in the region and the youth who are unhoused. And they said, well, what would be the ideal mix if you could get all of the supportive housing services that you needed, for unhoused youth, for yourselves, and, we're talking about the advocates as well. What would that mix look like? And this is what they came up with. And this is not based on what exists already. So they said this would be the perfect mix in each of the regions that would help to start to solve the problem moving forward and actually meet the needs in each region. And they also said that we would need a lot of change, like a lot of policy change and program change to make this a reality. Yeah. Oh, hang on. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Marley.
Sorry, we really just speaking the.
You'll have question pause at the end too, but this is good. Thank you.
Could you repeat what year this study or report is from?
This is
And then second question, real quick, under long-term housing, what do the RRHHH stand for? I'm guessing TH is transitional housing.
yeah, rapid rehousing and gosh, I wish I could remember what the other one was. Transitional housing is the end one. What's the HH? Yes, that's what it is. And they have it on there twice because they're talking about different times in like the timeline of when somebody starts to access services. So the first parts are like the front porch services, and it's all the way towards like the end where they're starting to kind of go into longer term housing. And this was in 2021. Yeah, and if anybody wants to grab my email or give me yours, I'd be happy to send out the link for this too, because it's a really cool report. All right, so keep on trucking forward here. Real quick, I just want to talk a little bit more about the McKinney-Vento Act. This is those numbers I reported, talked about earlier that were reported by the school districts. So the McKinney-Vento Act was enacted in 1987. It was created to address homelessness by providing federal funding for emergency shelters, transition housing, and supportive services. And it kind of has been amended over time. So they keep adding more and more services. And in 2009, there was like a kind of a bigger change that was made. It was the Homeless Emergency Assistance Rapid Transition to Housing Act. That's a mouthful. So the McKinney-Vento Act defines youth as homeless if there lack of fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So again, it includes doubling up, couch surfing, living in RV parks or camping grounds that weren't made for long-term stays. So kind of like those short-term, more vacation spots, and other kinds of substandard housing. So it has kind of a broad definition. And they define unaccompanied youth as youth not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian, while of course accompanied youth are. So that's a little bit of the difference there. And the McKinney-Vento Act for Education of Houseless Children and Youth program, what they're doing is their goal is to ensure that unhoused youth and children and youth are provided free, appropriate public education despite the lack of fixed, regular, and nighttime adequate place of residence. There's liaisons at every school, and they're working really closely with youth and family who are unhoused in every district. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Glenda. She'll take it from here.
So everybody stand up real quick. Stand up. It's the hardest thing to go to a training session after lunch. Okay, I find myself getting a little dreary up here. Yeah, I'm the one presenting and we're presenting and I'm like, holy cow, we're so boring. So just go around a little bit. Okay. Anybody need water? Anybody need AC? Go ahead and sit down. We're gonna continue. I just wanted to give people a little bit of a thank you for engaging that activity with me. We're gonna go, okay, I need to stay. I'm an attorney. Okay, did not play on TV. I did not stay on holiday last night, so I can't even claim to be one. The information I'm providing you going forward is a little droll. Okay, I want to show you just how in the state of Oregon, in regards to homeless youth and unaccompanied minors, how many different laws there are that cover different areas, okay? And some of you might work in the biz, helping with, and maybe you don't even realize there's other laws out there that you can kind of glean on them, okay? So with that stated, again, I can't provide legal advice. I can show you what the law says. I can't interpret the law for you, okay? So moving forward, let's talk about some homeless youth ORSs. In Oregon, ORS means Oregon Revised Statute. It's revised statutes are the laws that are put into place across the board. For criminal law, landlord tenant law, any law that we have is going to be in the ORS. Okay. So ORS 1.697, the right to contract for dwelling and utilities without parental consent. Who would have thought? Okay. Who knew that? So let's dive into this. So the purpose of this OS, it's important to understand and address that there's limitations regarding perceived legal limitations by landlords, okay? And that's why this ORS is here. Now, it's also important to address certain verbiage that ORS uses. The word may means a landlord does not have to do it. The word shall means whoever they're talking about must do it. Okay, so be aware of that. The word may is anything that they want. The word shall means they have to. So also in this ORS, let's define what minor means, because again, depending on what ORS you're reading, minor is going to be different. So in this one, minor means an unemancipated, unmarried person who is living apart from their parents or legal guardian. But it covers those that are 16 and 17, just outright, okay? It also covers those under the age of 16 who are either pregnant or have a child that's within their custody. All right? And what this ORS states is any minor may, again, not shall, may contract for the necessities for residential dwelling unit and for utility services at that unit. And it goes on to say they are 100% responsible for those bills. Okay? So if you're working with unaccompanied youth who fit one of these criteria, either 16 or 17, or under the age of 16, either pregnant or have a minor child living with them, utility companies. Okay, they may. So if you're an advocate, it's super, super important to understand this law. I would even probably print it out and have some kind of handout I handle it. Because they don't have to have a guardian sign with them. They can, and if that guardian does sign with them, that guardian is responsible for that, the payments. But if they don't, and they're unaccompanied, then they're responsible. Okay. With that statement, it's also mentioned that certain circumstances, I'll touch on this again with another ORS. Under certain circumstances, when there's a child that's not their parent or legal guardian, the state can require that parent or legal guardian to pay some kind of child support to that child. Okay. And in those cases, those parents aren't necessarily required to pay their rent if that child's entering into a rental contract with the landlord. So be aware of that. OS 47.799 is runaway and homeless youth. And this was House Bill 5019, and it was enacted in March 2023. This is specific about runaway and homeless youth. It talks about Oregon Department of Human Services, and what their obligation is supplying services for youth that are unaccompanied without housing. So Oregon Department of Human Services was responsible for coordinating statewide planning for the delivery of services for runaway and homeless youth, their families. So maybe it's a situation with a family that's in the Department of Human Services child welfare situation. Maybe their child went with foster care, their child rented from foster care. There's all kinds of circumstances which would engage the youth and their families. Okay, and that makes sense. The Department of Human Services would be responsible for coordinating statewide planning for that. Now, remember that word shall. Okay. This OS also states that Oregon Department of Human Services shall recommend policies to integrate services and support for runaways and homelessness. I mean, say that continuing care, CFC means continuing care for children in a specific situation. Continuing care is also another term that's used in the state of Oregon. That can be applied to different things, okay? In this case, it's children between the ages of 0 and 17. And they recommend policies for services and support for youth who are 18 to 20. Okay. Who continue to be ill or homeless. So with this specific situation, they don't go to 25. Okay. So be aware of that. Now, if they're talking about foster youth that are still engaged with the state, those services go until they're 25. All right. So again, these are different OSs, different rules for different things, depending on what's going on, is going to apply to a different situation. So I think a lot of times what happens when people are working with homeless youth, they get kind of stuck to what they know, okay? So be aware there's all kinds of laws out there that can help your programs, your services, if you just know those laws and who to engage with, okay? Services with agencies are not required, okay, to develop a comprehensive and/or coordinated approach for services and support. Now, it says really, they're not required to do that. It would behoove them to do that. And in many cases, they won't do it in certain regions, and other regions they don't. Okay. But they shall appoint an advisory committee consisting of specific stakeholders. Who would those stakeholders be? They state that those stakeholders they shall include representatives of youth, nonprofit organizations, statewide coalitions related to running homeless youth services and supports, including services and supports for youth from 18 to 20 years of age, who continue to be or become homeless in the joint process described in subsection 3, and 3 we've already covered, so don't worry about that. So just be aware, they may work with other agencies, but they are required to develop this group of people that come together and provide information, okay? And that includes homeless youth got to be in that group. They want to hear firsthand what it's like for those folks, what it means for them to be out there without supports, services, whatnot. That's homeless youth law 75 resident facilities. This is an amendment to a House bill, and it was amended back in June of 2022. So services may establish license. It's not shall, okay? License, certify, or authorize independent residence facilities for unmarried youth. Now, I see one of these programs happen in Eastern Oregon. It was in Pendleton. Well, services purchased a duplex, and they were housing foster care youth that were aging out. Well, at the age of 18, they're no longer in foster care. Okay, sometimes a place to live, especially if they're sticking with the foster care program until they're 25. So they developed a pilot project. They purchased this duplex. Each duplex had 2 bedrooms that could hold 2 people. They wanted them to have their own space, their own bedroom. And it was pretty successful. Okay, they had to work with the youth. They got them employed. They had to pay a portion of their utilities and rent. They helped them with a bank account, goal planning, and they had some case management on a consistent basis with them. And it was pretty successful. I think this is where this comes from. Okay. So with this, if Department of Services establishes, some kind of residential facility, there's some criteria that go along with it. The youth must be between the ages of 16 and 20. They must have been placed in at least one substitute care resource. Does anyone know what that means? What's a substitute care resource? That's out-of-home placement directly supervised by the Department of Human Services or other agency. That might be juvenile detention. That might be incarceration. That might be foster care. So these things would have to apply in order for them to be eligible for these placements. Department of Human Services determines the youth process, the skills and level of responsibility required for transition into adulthood. That means they can't just put anyone into these facilities. These youth have got to be able to hold a job, make goals, pay bills. Okay, they can't be like an IDD youth or a youth with maybe some really traumatic situations where maybe they have some mental health issues or other issues. They've got to be pretty independent. It also requires that they receive permission from the appropriate juvenile court if they're under the jurisdiction of the court. So the court and juvenile department go, yes, this youth is appropriate for this program. It also determines if the youth is suitable for independent living programs. So again, there's probably some kind of placement or assessment they use on the individual to determine if they're going to be appropriate for this. Because honestly, you can't just put any youth living on their own, especially when they have no family supports, right? And they're relying on the state for their support system. This program does require that there is counseling services available to this. They have to engage with counseling services while they're there, and they have to have some kind of minimal case management. Okay, it's not going to be overbearing case management every day, but they have to meet with the case manager on a regular basis. OS 458, 528. Oregon Housing Community Services and Oregon Department of Human Services shall, again, there's the word shall, serve as the lead agency in administrating the state policy regarding homelessness. Does that surprise anybody? I'm not surprised by that. The purpose of this ORS, okay, homelessness means the lack of decent, safe, and stable and permanent place to live that is for human habitation. Okay, again, we have to define that because depending on where you're reading and where you're looking, you're going to get a totally different definition. Okay, so just basically, homelessness is a place not meant for having someone who's living in a place that's not meant for human habitation. Oregon Housing Community Services, Oregon Department of Human Services, and Oregon Housing Stability Council, Community Action Partnership of Oregon, to work to encourage and create comprehensive and collaborative support systems and housing resources to end homelessness. So this includes youth too. This is not just adults, but this is adults, youth, families, union. All right. So these agencies are required to work together. So how complicated do you think it gets at the state level, where Department of Human Services is required to do all this stuff? The Housing Community Services is required to do all this stuff. Then they have to work with these agencies for these things, and these agencies with these things. Okay. I truly, when I read this and I get baffled myself, I don't need to keep it all together. I can see where things might get a little mingled sometimes, or maybe not done, or overlooked. Programs should provide outcomes to increase accountability for further development for more effective methods. They should be cost effective. So they're collecting data through this whole process. Does that shock anybody? We all collect data, I guess, right? And they're trying to figure out which programs work. This can be shortening the length of homelessness. That's their goal. Okay, they want to shorten the length of homelessness. They want to establish repeated periods of homelessness, or they eliminate that. And they want to address issues with homelessness statewide. That's their goal with this specific ORS. Okay. And then, I'm so hot. I'm so sorry. That organized community services shall a long-term rental assistance program for people under the age of 25. Okay, so I know someone asked me earlier about HUD programs for homeless youth. I'm going to find out about those. I didn't realize HUD had those programs. I know Oregon has them, but I didn't know how to have them. So assistance should be available to individuals who are or have recently been homeless, as we defined earlier. Any substitute care program, we talked about that earlier. Okay, what that might be. Incarcerated or detained in a correctional facility or detention facility, residing in a facility for dependency, treatment, rehab, mental health. Services shall implement programs in 3 or 4 regions of Oregon. And they must be a coastal, urban, and a rural area. Okay, so anybody here living in one of these areas that they know that Oregon Housing Community Services have implemented these types of programs yet? Where are they? I'm just interested. Okay. Okay, got it.
And then Northwest Oregon Public Housing Authority.
Okay. Clatsop, Columbia. Got it. Okay, perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Yes, Carol. Okay, hang on 1 second. Molly's going to bring you the microphone. It's okay. Sorry. I forgot. Yeah, me too.
I was just thinking of the youth that I encounter under the age of 25 that I see repeatedly, who I also see in the jail log. Are the police at all required to try to coordinate this thing? That I see a brother and sister who are 21 and 23, and they've been in jail multiple times. I know they don't have parents. I know they live on the street. Should they not be
Part of the conversation is what you're asking.
Yeah,
So I would suggest, if anyone doesn't know Carol, this is Carol Emmons, she's a Sunnyvale City Council person. I would suggest you contact Human Services. And they have to, they shall include other people within their groups to have these conversations. And include law enforcement in those conversations. Yeah. Wow. I would suggest that. And thank you. These are the regions where Washington County, Midland, and. Okay. Sure, services shall be sold to other agencies and collect data. There we go, Carol. Oregon Housing Community Services may contract with other agencies. So with this, you can also contact Oregon Housing Community Services. So you're collecting data from jails and juvenile facilities to find out how many homeless youth are being incarcerated and or held there. Are they getting that data? They should be, right? And if that's the case, that would be a really good mark in regards to find out what kind of programs can be developed to that area, especially for those the youth that's in those barriers. So reason for homelessness, let's talk about that. I'm sure we can all think of one. Anybody here? Oh, I'm gonna give you one right there. Okay. Who here can give you a different reason for homelessness for youth? Just spout it out. There we go. Mental health or parental addiction, perfect. Like conflict at home, that could cause conflict. Maybe some kind of abuse. Okay, so sexual abuse or sexual orientation, school programs, pregnancy, and substance use are primary reasons under that family conflict. I'm assuming that maybe there's some parents that don't agree with their child's sexual orientation, or they're getting bad grades in school. Maybe it's because they have a substance abuse issue and parents aren't recognizing it. Okay, but for whatever reason, there's this conflict that starts because of it. Okay, maybe the child gets kicked out or they decide to leave because they can't handle the conflict. There are some stats that say first-time homelessness due to volatile and unsafe family conflict erupting into parental rejection, getting kicked out, or fleeing family conflict. Okay, so that's the number of reasons why these youth are leaving their homes. Okay, it doesn't mean it's the only reasons. It's just higher probability that they're gone because of that. 70% of homeless youth state they cannot go home due to their parents' unwillingness to allow them to return because of that family conflict. So they get kicked out or leave, and they don't. Let's say their sexual orientation is something other than their gender assigned at birth. Okay, and they're identifying in a different way. And the parents are truly religious, and they're like, "We don't agree with this. You can't live under our roof." They're not going to change the way they see themselves. That would make it very hard to return home. All right. Or if they have a substance abuse problem and they haven't told anyone. And that's not going to change their behavior, their school grades. They know this. But they also know if they tell mom and dad aren't going to let them in their home. So I mean, there's many reasons why youth can't return home once they leave or once they're kicked out. Okay, so for the LGBTQIA youth, in 2023, approximately 35,000 people under the age of 25 experienced homelessness as an unaccompanied minor. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, and intersex youth are significantly represented in this homeless population. Okay, that to me is very significant. One of the reasons is probably why these children are at home. LGBTQIA, say I put I on here because that was the data I was collecting. That's what they were putting on their data. Okay, they didn't put the A on there, so just be aware of that. Young adults experience homelessness at more than twice the rate of their peers due to family rejection, and that comes with a high percentage of mental health issues, abuse, whether it be physical, emotional, or sexual, and discrimination based off sexual orientation or gender identity. They have trauma due to homelessness, more likely to live on the streets, which includes higher rates of conduct disorder, vulnerable to physical and sexual exploitation on the streets, Many of them suffer from PTSD, suicidal behaviors, which to me is very problematic for that population. Okay. If they're saying that they say 70% of homeless youth were experiencing this type of situation, that's really scary to me. Other barriers for homeless youth. Lack of education. They're not really getting educated when they're out there. Most of them are not. They might be engaged with the child welfare system through foster care or other types of programs. They might be involved in the juvenile justice system where they've been arrested and convicted of a crime. They might have behavioral health issues that are not being addressed on the streets. And there's, of course, physical and reproductive health issues. Many of these students lack transportation. They're unable to lack transportation to go to school or get the services they need. They may not have clothing to go, to feel comfortable at school. And I think when Jamie was talking about McKinney-Vento earlier, that's part of what McKinney-Vento does, obviously. It provides these youth that are either homeless, doubled up in housing. It doesn't matter if they're with their parent or not. If they're not in a fixed, stable home with their parents, they're considered homeless in a McKinney-Vento. And McKinney-Vento can provide a lot of services to them if they're school age, okay? And it's the job. Every school district will have McKinney-Vento liaisons, and their job is to make sure those students get the proper clothing, shoes, school supplies, food, you name it. So those children don't have to worry about where their next meal comes from, where they're going to lay their head that night. They can just concentrate on school. Other barriers for homeless youth. Reasons why youth experience homelessness find it hard to access health care. I find it hard to access health care. I can't even imagine being a 17-year-old on the street, okay, trying to meet through the healthcare system. You probably don't have an ID. You probably don't have a birth certificate, okay? You probably don't even know your social security number. And so with that, and going into the proper clinic, you don't have Oregon health plan, you don't have insurance. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would look like. So they lack transportation, paperwork, they may not have. Lengthy process time for paperwork. They don't even know what that looks like. Like they have to go apply for a social security card. It's going to be mailed to them. They don't even have a mailing address. And therefore, I don't think anyone who dealt with Social Security Administration, if you do not have a physical address, you can't have a P.O. box. If you don't have a physical address, they will not mail you anything. FYI. So you have a homeless youth on the street who does not have they don't have a mailing address, or they're using a post office box of some sort. Social Security Administration will not mail them anything. So it's hard for me to even gain that information. How many of you try to get an ID or assist somebody who's homeless with an ID? How many of you had to say, no, the address on the ID is the state under the 6th Street Bridge in Pendleton, Oregon? I had a fight with the DMV people about that. That is a physical address and it can go on an identification, just so you know. So if someone's living under the 10th Street Bridge, in whatever city, and you are assisting them with getting an ID so they can at least apply for places, okay, and they can get the services they need. Because the state of Oregon says they have a physical place on an ID, they can't just put transient. So it's where they're normally sleeping, okay? And they can literally put under the 10th Street Bridge, under the 6th Street Bridge, in this park, whatever, they can put that on the ID. The financial resources and health insurance, that's a big problem for anybody, not just the homeless folks, but thinking of youth that don't have access to this. How do they even know how to access this, right? How many of you have helped someone apply for the Oregon Health Plan or food stamps or any of those programs? Holy cow, okay? I'm going to tell you a little story about my brother. My brother's mentally ill, and he was homeless for a while in his car on his mental health medications. So it was literally riding a roller coaster with him, doing well, then not doing well. And when he wasn't doing well, he had to re-engage with all these services again. He was unable to do that by himself. So then my sister and I had to sit down with him, go through the computer, take him to a location, fill out the paperwork, whatever it meant, okay? And it's very, very difficult if you're dealing with somebody who cannot understand the lingo, doesn't understand the paperwork, who doesn't understand how to do it. okay? They don't understand the benefit from it. But, like, you know, for instance, with my brother, he, well, I'll be very blunt about it. They're selling his food stamps for gas money. Other people sell their food stamps for drug money. Okay, then they can't eat. Okay, so with that stated, because he needed his car, the gas money was more important to him than his food. Just so I want to explain why that was the case. So with that situation, okay, lacking the know-how or the ability to access service is a huge thing. Lack of awareness of where to access healthcare, confidential issues. How many people work with homeless youth or other homeless folks that they don't want to talk to government officials? All the time, right? Okay, so, and whether that be a mental health issue or they just don't trust the system, maybe they grew up in the foster care system and they want no part of nobody, okay? It's very, very hard to convince people to get the services they need. Many times they need parental consent. Remember that whole renting from a landlord? A landlord may, they don't have to, but they may rent to a youth, especially when they're 18. We talked about that slide earlier. They can do that. And if you're advocating for youth, I'm telling you, have that written for these landlords, provide it to them, advocate hard for these youth. Because especially if they're able to maintain their property, pay their bills, if they're getting a subsidy of some sort. Remember earlier, Jamie said source of income is a protected class. Any kind of subsidy a youth is getting to help pay for their housing is protected in Oregon. And landlords can't deny that. Distrust of adults or professionals. Again, we talked about that. Denial by youth that services are needed. Okay, like they don't need services. I'm good. I got my friends out here on the street. We take care of each other. When those friends are the ones that are manipulating them and harming them ultimately. Lack of coordinated services, outreach-free youth experiencing homelessness. That happens a lot in rural areas. It happens. Like we do have youth that don't live with their parents. They're couch hopping with friends or relatives. Somebody's living in their car. We have colleges in our rural areas where a lot of college students are living in their cars, their vehicles, or couch hopping with their friends because they can't afford the rent by themselves and they can't necessarily get a full-time job to help pay the bills because of their college studies. So again, homelessness looks very, very different for everybody. How to advocate for homeless youth during the housing application process. How many of you guys help with homeless youth with applications? Okay. Carol, she's helped everybody. She's amazing. If you get a chance to just sit down with Carol and talk to her, I urge you to do so. Okay. She is absolutely amazing. The services she's provided to her community are just certainly unsurpassed. Review application policies requirements before paying an application fee. Okay, you have every right to ask the landlord, what is your policies? And if a youth has got some criminal history, maybe if they were 22 years old, and they got busted when they were 18 for some possession charge or something, and it's on their criminal history. But let's say they completed substance abuse treatment, they're doing well, they're working with your program. Okay, they could ask for reasonable accommodation at the time of application due to their disability, because in fair housing laws, substance use disorder and alcohol use is a disability if that individual is not currently using illegal substances. Okay. So if someone's got problem barriers in their housing due to substance use or alcohol use, they could literally ask for reasonable accommodation at the time of application, saying, please look past my criminal history. Please note that time I was actively engaged in my addiction. Currently today, I'm not using. I completed substance abuse treatment. I go to community support groups on a regular basis. I have a sponsor. I'm working part-time. Here's my certificate of completion. Here's my letter from my employer. Here's a letter from my sponsor. They have to honor that. Okay. Documents, like those reasonable accommodation documents beforehand. Don't give a landlord, hi Kevin, how are you? Don't deny the applicant when you know that applicant's got barriers to housing. If a reasonable accommodation can be requested at the time of application for any disability reason, and there's been a shift or change in the behavior, you can show that shift or change, ask for that reasonable accommodation at the time of application and provide that verification. So again, employment, volunteer verification, successful completion of some kind of treatment program, verification of subsidies. If they're getting a subsidy from your program or another program that you're working with, please, I can't explain to you how many landlords I talk to. I also manage a landlord hotline for the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So they're telling me they're getting a subsidy, but I have no clue how much anybody's paying. Okay, the landlord needs to know how much that subsidy is for them to make a determination if the person has enough income in the household. And when they do the calculation, they need to use the amount the tenant will be paying for their 3 times or 2.5 times the amount of rent. It's not the full amount of rent at that point in time. It's what the tenant will be paying. Okay. And so be aware of that. Role play with your youth. They don't know how to talk to landlords. They have no clue what that looks like. Have you tried to talk to a youth lately? Who's ordered coffee at a barista lately? I did this morning. I was just like looking at this young lady who just had no clue. Okay. With that stated, they don't know how to talk to adults. They've lived their whole lives in their phones, texting, and so through social media and whatnot. They have no concept of what it means to communicate face to face with somebody. And if they walk into a landlord's office, communicating in the way they communicate with me when I order my coffee, I can almost guarantee the landlord's going to shove them aside. Okay. Role play with them. Get them used to having these conversations with you as if you're the landlord. Know the law. Remember that OS 109697? That's the one about landlords renting to minors. Okay. Have that printed out with you. Again, it doesn't say shall, it says may. But does not mean a landlord cannot rent to a minor, especially if they can prove there's a subsidy, the rent utilities are being paid, and they're going to have supports in housing. Make sure the application is completed 100%. If there are questions on the application that do not apply to that youth, make sure they write NA in the space. The landlord needs another look at it, and it doesn't apply to them. If spaces are left blank, what happens is the landlord can deny based off of line by omission. Okay. Every space must be addressed in an application when someone's applying for housing, and you want to make sure this youth is actually successful in getting housing. So make sure that you look over their applications before they hand them in. Even fill out a dummy application with them and have a packet for them. All the information they need for the application is right there. They just pull it off other applications and fill it in with the other applications. Reasonable accommodation and modification at the time of application. We briefly discussed this earlier. Most people are always with disability. Reasonable accommodation is based off of disability. Okay. And that could be a physical and mental health disability, or someone with IDD. Substance use disorder is a disability under fair housing law. Again, if they're currently not using illegal substances, best if done at the time of application, and don't wait for that landlord to deny. In Portland, with their fair ordinances, they have a different process they go through, but not all landlords in Oregon go through that same process. If a landlord denies in Oregon based off of criminal history, they have to do an individualized assessment on an individual, giving them some time to provide them with verification to see if they can actually pass the background for the criminal history. Maybe it was the wrong criminal history for somebody else's. Sometimes landlords get what they call near hits. They pop someone's name in their background search engine, and someone with a similar name and date of birth gets popped up, and it's not the same individual, and they have criminal history, and they deny based off that. Or they're looking at the arrest record. The arrests are not convictions. Okay. So if there's any information provided to that applicant that says that you're being denied based off your criminal history, here's the criminal history, and the applicant's like, I've never been arrested in my life, they have every right to go back and say, landlord, this is not me. But don't, if they have those barriers in housing, criminal history, poor credit, poor history, it was based off of like maybe undiagnosed mental health disability, other disability related situation, and that's no longer going to be the situation anymore. Maybe now they're medicated, working with a provider, went through treatment, whatever the situation is. It's about reasonable accommodation in front. Most people provide verification of that. Again, the verification of that is important for the landlord. So certification of program completion can be a form of verification. letters from appropriate professionals who are knowledgeable about the diagnosis and can contest the need for the request. Let's ask this question. How many people are case managers? You are, okay. Have you ever read losing accommodation for somebody before? Okay. And how often are those accepted?
Very
Perfect, so you know what you're doing, okay. Okay, so if there's an accommodation with the verification that someone needs to prove their disability, doesn't have to come from a doctor or a therapist or a counselor. It can come from a case manager. It can come from their sponsor. It can be a certificate of completion of a program, as long as it can show there's been a shift or change in their behavior, okay? And there's support from case managers, teachers, others who know the youth and can say nice things about them. Even if it's a letter from grandma, as long as there's other verification. Grandma can't look at the verification, just so you know that, okay? Because grandma's always going to say nice things. Contact requests are being violated. And we'll give that information to you at the end of this program. But right now, I'm going to hand it back over to Jamie to finish this thing off. At this point, are there any questions? Okay.
awesome.
I'm gonna go through this again.
That's oh, good. Thank you. Awesome, Brenda. Thank you. That was a lot of really important information, and you did amazing delivering all of it. So we're going to wrap it up with just a little bit of like what can we do about this issue? A little bit of prevention, that kind of thing. So how can we address youth homelessness? So we have some ideas, some strategies. I did not come up with these. These came from that group that we were talking about. The Department of Human Services has a youth advisory committee. Their role is to advise the department, provide recommendations, and to help coordinate services for unhoused youth across the state. There are a lot of members of the committee. They're voting members. They come from different folks who are serving unhoused youth. So there's like they come from Oregon Department of Human Services, the Health Authority, the Native American Youth Association, shelter programs for youth like the Maslow Project, and the New Avenues for Youth and an ALBA collaborative, religious entities who are providing housing services for youth across the state and others. So it's a lot of folks with a lot of good information that have been doing this work for a long time. And here are some of the strategies that they suggest. Some of this might be, if you're doing this work, you might be like, no, some folks might not know it. Some of it was new to me. So we'll just go over it real quick. So stable housing is essential. The shortage of housing options, there's a lot of shortage basically of housing options for unhoused youth across the state. What they're saying is we especially need low barrier housing options like emergency and rapid rehousing, transitional housing, long-term supportive housing that's specifically for youth. So just looking at this population, taking into account what they need. Just something here, give me one sec. Okay. It's important to identify at-risk youth and provide crisis counseling and support to the youth and their families as a preventative measure, right? To create family stabilization, hopefully to prevent, the kids from leaving the house or the youth from leaving the house. So they have all those supports and can keep them before they ever do have to go to the streets or, other places. The program should focus on reunifying youth with their families, if possible, if it's safe and appropriate, or other, support networks with trusted adults. They need access to services, right? Just like everybody needs access to services. So what this committee is suggesting is more drop-in centers, day centers, where youth who are living on the street can come and they can get those basic needs met, like hygiene supplies, food, showers, all of the things. Another important thing that these centers can offer are the other supportive things like Glenda was mentioning, like medical care, mental health services, addiction treatment, etc. Right? So kind of one-stop shop where they can actually get to
kind of spread out in places, not just in the middle of cities, but also thinking about those rural communities where, again, youth were hitchhiking just to get to a place where they could access services. And think about the future, you know, like we have to think about all the things. And if youth are going to be successful moving forward, making sure that they have education support, employment supports, kind of coordinating all those services across the board. And when we're thinking about these programs, we have to think about not just what, but how we're doing them. So we really need to think about how we can make them accessible and equitable. The services should focus on meeting youth where they are and supporting their growth. The services should emphasize healing and be appropriate for youth who have experienced abuse and trauma. Sorry, I need to get my bullet points up here. Services should meet youth again where they are and work to lessen the harm from risky behaviors. They should be culturally competent. So what that means is they should be designed to meet the needs of youth from all cultural backgrounds, races, ethnicities, gender identities, sexual orientations, so that everyone feels safe and welcome. That was some of the feedback that I was hearing, and all kinds of things I was reading about from across the state. Is a lot of programs just didn't feel accessible in that way. People didn't feel like they belonged there, and they didn't feel safe in the programs that exist currently. They should, kind of like what I mentioned in that last set, again, these programs should be focusing on building permanent connections. So with family and other safe, positive adults. They should be strength-based. So services should identify and build upon the strengths and skills that unhoused youth have and go from there. Services should build self-efficacy skills and community supports that they can rely on moving forward. And one of the most important points, I think, is elevating their voices, the voices of youth who are unhoused, is crucial if we're going to find the right solutions, because only they have the unique experiences that can really lead to interventions that are going to meet their needs, right? So we need to hear what they have to say and include them in the process for creating programs and policies that are going to address the issues. They're going to provide the information to us that will make the programs accessible and the services and make it relevant to them, because they all have unique experiences, right? And it's important to offer leadership roles as well, right? Not just leadership roles, but multiple ways to get involved, which can foster ownership in it and really their knowledge is it's just indispensable to creating that lasting change that's needed. So get them involved, find them, try to, talk about why it's so important that they're involved in the work. And with that, also, Fair Housing Council of Oregon is here for y'all moving forward. We do lots of different kinds of work in the community, assisting folks who are around fair housing needs. So if fair housing questions are coming up in the work that you're doing, you can contact us directly through our emails, which are on those slides at the beginning. You can find us on our website. There's lots of resources and a whole library on there as well. If someone that you're working with is experiencing discrimination in housing based on one of those protected classes, there's a button on the website, pretty much on every page. It's that pink one at the top, and you can click it to report housing discrimination. If you're going to be reporting discrimination on behalf of someone that you're working with, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a button for advocates. So it's a form just for you to reach us and kind of outline some of the issues that you're seeing in our enforcement department. We'll get back to you and kind of talk about next steps, however that might look. It might be advocating directly with the landlord. It might be, starting to file a claim. It kind of looks different for each situation that somebody might be going through.
Question, if it's okay. We have today with us the Fair Housing Council of Oregon's. Hello, I'm gonna pick on the spots, Stephen. Because I'm dropping everything in. So we're very fortunate to have the director of our enforcement team with us here. who's an attorney, if you were to get some kind of someone contacting me through our website saying I'm 15, I'm 16, or one of their advocates saying I think I've been discriminated against, some kind of housing activity of some sort. I'll say this. All of these types of housing, I don't care if it's foster care, I don't care if it's Department of Human Services, who is going to be providing some kind of housing program of some sort, transitional housing for youth. I don't care what program it is, where these youth are living, fair housing laws apply. Okay. How would you advocate for a youth? Would you have to have an advocate assisting them if they're youth and they don't have a guardian or a member with their parents? I guess this question for you since put me on the spot. It's a lot of
Yeah, it is. That's well, off the top of my head, if we would have to have a guardian to work with that youth, we wouldn't have. So we do engage in some soft advocacy, which we would not have to have that we wouldn't have to have a caseworker with that. However, if we were going to sign an advocacy agreement with someone under the age of 18, it's possible that we would have to involve a guardian for ability to contract reasons. So but soft advocacy, we can still, if we're aware of a landlord that's doing something incorrectly, we can do what we call soft advocacy and send a letter that says, hey, did you know that landlords should be doing this kind of thing? So I don't know if that's the right answer, Glenda, but yeah, so there are ways that we can advocate, even if the person isn't working with a caseworker or doesn't have a guardian that can sign a contract on their behalf. But for direct advocacy purposes, in order to sign an advocacy agreement, we would need someone that can sign that for them. So, yes.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that.
I'm actually going to hand it right back to you, Stephen. When someone is making a report of housing discrimination, what information is most important and what cases do you prioritize?
Yeah, so, okay, I'll start with the first question. We will prioritize cases where there is an issue of safety involved. So those involve eviction cases, not able to get into housing cases. People who have been dealing with, who have high barriers and are trying to get into housing. They are working with someone, they're getting into housing except for a discriminatory practice. We want to get them into a safe situation. We also handle situations where there are disability-related accommodations that aren't being met. Failure to meet those accommodations are creating a safety hazard. So that's what we prioritize. We handle all types of discrimination, but if there's a safety element, it gets prioritized. What was the other part of the question? Important information. I love information, so literally anything you have time to put on a page is what we want. But things that are most helpful to us are things that are in writing. So if there has been a reasonable accommodation made, we want a copy of that, as well as if the denial is in writing, we want a copy of the denial. If we are talking about an application, I mean, it depends on the case, right? But if we're talking about an application being denied, we want the copy of the application. We want a copy of the reason for denial, which the tenant is entitled to a written reason for their denial. They're not always very detailed, but they give us something to go off of, which is, better than nothing. We want landlords are required if they're going to screen their tenants or perform background check to publish their screening criteria. So if you have access to that screening criteria, we want that. Otherwise, we at least want to know who your landlord is or who the housing provider is that's causing the issues, so that we can look that information up ourselves, so we can run property searches, so we can run ownership searches. Documents are good, but we really need to know who the parties are that are involved. A lot of times we'll get inquiries where they don't mention their names or the landlord's names. And it's really hard to do anything with that information. So the short answer is as much as you can possibly give us, but it's going to vary from case to case.
There's a question.
I'll also add, it's really important to make sure that the nexus between discrimination and protected class is relevant in your inquiry. Otherwise, we might assume it's just a landlord tenant law issue. So really making sure that that connection is clear to protected class.
Thank you. I'll try to keep this quick because I know I already asked one question, but so a little bit of kind of the perspective I'm coming from. My name is Daisy Kiana, she, her pronouns, senior housing policy analyst at Metro Regional Government. My question, and it might be a little more theoretical and anybody's welcome to answer, but age is not a protected class.
Okay, it was under certain circumstances, so again, certain jurisdictions can add additional jurisdictional protected classes at the local level. So Portland, Eugene. Does Corvallis have it also? Okay, Portland, Eugene, I think Bend have age. Salem, thank you. I think 3 of them did. They, in that jurisdiction within that city limits, they have ages of protection. It's not the same all across Oregon, so just be aware of that.
Right.
So, yeah, Portland's age and occupation.
Oh, it does. Great. Maybe it was a conversation for another day, but I was just wondering kind of like contextually and historically why age maybe was left out of the Fair Housing Act, because it, by proxy, it looked, it kind of gets at children with familial status and it kind of gets to over.
Yes, this is over 18, by the way, for those specific jurisdictional classes, protected classes. And the reason why is because college students were having a hard time getting into housing. Landlords were denying them based on their age. And so those bigger cities that have a lot of college students, they added those protections. So landlords couldn't go, oh, college student, I know you just want living in mom and dad's house, out of the dorms, and you're wanting to get into your own place, and you're like 19, 20. We're not renting to you. You're too young. You have no rental history. They can't say that now. So that's why. It's not because that age criteria is specifically meant for that, but it will cover anybody over the age of 18 or older, if the landlord's saying, I'm not renting to you because you're 23, or I don't want a 95-year-old living in my house. That would cover them also.
Thank you.
Oh, question. I think it's because federally they're not seeing. Okay, I'll tell you. I think I'm gonna stand up. Sorry, I don't mean to sit down. I honestly believe that the federal statutes don't get changed until there's enough push at the federal level for them to get changed. Like they didn't add sexual orientation and gender identity until like 2 years ago. Was it 2023? Yes, exactly. It was just something that Biden had stated through support. I think it was a presidential. Thank you, executive order that he signed. Okay, so it's not actually linked either. So it's not really added until there's like a mass movement at the federal level, and kind of dig a little bit deeper into those additional ones that added up the initial first 4. The reason why they added sex was because that during the 1970s, women weren't able to get into housing, either purchase and or rent, because they were told that they couldn't maintain the home or pay for it. Okay, yeah, right. In the 80s, disability. Who here attended that session yesterday was talking about ADA? Well, we were talking about they dove down into Oregon's history of youth hospital and other hospitals in Oregon. During the 80s, there was a huge shift with funding. And also how people were being treated in institutions that were mentally ill and or whatever, okay? They were being forced on the street and had no place to go. And so, and that wasn't just in Oregon, that was across the board federally, which was happening. So they added disability as a protected class at that time to give protections to people with disabilities. Yeah. At the same time, prior to 1988, many of us who were old enough, Jamie, Carol, John, Shile, we were all, I don't know, it's not even an idea. Remember advertising that stated no kids, no pets. Okay. And that meant in Oregon, nearly 70% of all families with children would have had access to rental housing. Okay, so until it becomes a problem at the federal level, they are not going to add it as a federal statute or part of the Federal Fair Housing Act as a protection. And that's why if you want it in Oregon, across the state, you can't, it's a lot easier to change a state stat, like protection when it is a federal protection. Contact your representatives, your legislation people. If you think it should be across the board, age should be protected, by all means, start writing letters, making phone calls, and they'll listen. Believe me, they'll listen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so you know what time it is? It's May time. This is the deal. We've got like, I don't know, 13 minutes. I'll sit it all day to answer questions. Or we can leave early. I'm hotter than sin. I'm just telling you that right now. I'm going home after this, and when I get my car, you guys have no idea what I'm gonna do in my car. I'm not gonna tell you. I might get pulled over and arrested. Shut down. Go ahead.
That's a young woman I've known since she was 20 years old. And she is in jail currently for possible controlled substance, but failure to appear with bail of $450,000. She is now 23, and I know she's been in the streets for at least 3 years.
Does she know where to access services for youth?
Not yet.
I was like, I'm all over it. She's gonna go bail her out of jail today when she gets home. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Do you have a question? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I for one, I'd love a little bit more question time, if we can.
I can wait a little bit longer. I'm not gonna die up here.
We're all hot together.
Yeah.
I had some questions about leveraging the statutes. Definitely the reasonable accommodation one, I felt like a novelist over my time as a case manager because it's just automatic and very successful. It feels like if you have the knowledge of this statute, then all you need to know how to do is structure that letter, make sure you're referencing it, make sure, that
Connecting the dots.
that is actually, applicable. But that, so I'm sorry, I'm going to back up. I have 2 questions.
Okay. I might have 2 answers.
So it was new information to me about being able to lease without parental consent, is even if they're not emancipated, because in my mind, just logically, I would think that would be step number 1. And then
He says in that ORS, this ORS is specific for unemancipated minors.
yeah.
So landlords understand they can rent to them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to, but they can. And so if they've got someone advocating in a good way, I'm telling you what's going to happen. So,
and so that feels like another one that like, okay, I'm today years old. Now I know to use that. It's probably just like you said, a simple education with that landlord if they don't also know, and then your choice. But my question to that is, in those instances, and to anybody who has experience with that too, if you've seen it and done it, are landlords changing their leases? Are they adding addendums? Are they changing their documentation? Because I'm just thinking of a lease that every page says adults over 18, all adults over 18. And so it's just a small thing, but I'm like.
The reason why they do that is because it's just a standard practice they have that if you're 18 and older, you can sign a lease. And they're gonna do a background check on you, and there would be criminal background, credit history, or running, references, or whatever. And if the adult doesn't pass the background, they can deny the application, okay? They can say, oh, it's this application, but this application will not, so this person can't live here, just so you know. You figure out what you're gonna do there. But landlords don't realize, I don't think they know this ORS, I'm just gonna say it. Yeah, your rental application might say 18 and older, but under certain circumstances, you should give yourself enough wiggle room in your policy to accept applications from minors who meet a certain criteria. Flat out.
And then is there an obligation to?
Or something, so.
Yeah, okay. And I have a part 2, sorry.
So actually, if I were a landlord's attorney, God forbid, And I was reviewing this and I was looking at the standard, a multifamily Northwest lease or something like that, that, like you said, all tenants over 18 or all adults over the age of 18. I would want my landlord client to go through, scratch out and say named residents or named tenants, because it would create potential complications, but there's no problem with doing that. Like, they chose that language, but there is plenty of other language that could work instead of that. So if your landlords are having problems with that, just mention like it can probably be changed. It might take like 30 minutes with your attorney to go over your contracts and make those necessary changes. And it'd be worth it because you have a tenant now who's going to have guaranteed rent because we're going to help you pay it. So something along those lines. But yeah, I do think it'd be if landlords point that out, you might be worth being like, yeah, if we're going to be on the level, it might be an issue. You might want to talk to your attorney about it real quick.
Okay. Thank you.
Stephen knows way more than we do. I'm so glad. He's walking in, I go, oh, he has no idea. I'm gonna throw him under the bus.
I'm happy to learn about that. That's pretty cool. And as I'm like categorizing it, again, that sounds like just a truth. It's a statute. It's been passed. It's established. If you know it and it's applicable and eligible, you're going to be good to go.
Yes.
The last statute that you referenced had to 458-390, the long-term rents being made available, may be made available. That speaks more to, that's as anybody who's probably like in this work, it's like, oh, points of access, things exist,
Yes.
points of access. And so when I see this statute, I'm like, oh, that's so great. But the only thing I can really think of is programs, funding, subsidies that are probably all just still through the homeless youth continuum. Like,
so this is the deal. I'm gonna say this. I have come across a lot of programs provide subsidy and different, like for different people for different reasons. So you're gonna have your local CAP agencies that have their subsidies available for, like, and they have different grants. So it's gonna be for seniors disabled, it's gonna be families with children, it's gonna be permanently disabled, whatever. They have their criteria. They may also be working contracted through Department of Human Services to supply youth housing subsidy or housing subsidy to families that are engaged in the foster with child welfare, okay, or self-sufficiency. It just depends. I've also seen programs that, for instance, like senior disabled services or DHS in general have their own subsidy programs. They have HUD has their own subsidy programs, like through the housing authorities and whatnot. Different agencies can access this funding and use it in many different ways. So it's not just the normal ones you think about. If you can just, I guess try to find out in your local area who supplies housing subsidy for youth or adults or families, whatever it is, just make a list of those. Ask them how long the funding is good for, because we also know that funding gets dispersed and then it's gone in 2 years and then you never see it again. Ask them how long that funding is going to be good for, because you don't want to be, referring folks over to services they can't access. I would just suggest, this is what I do. I get myself involved with those community groups that talk about this stuff, and we share information. And they'll let us know, like, hey, we have additional domestic violence funds. If you're working with domestic violence, please let us know, and use them in that direction, because DV won't have those funds right now. So with that stated, I'm just going to say, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's access to them, knowing where they're at. And hopefully I answered that question. Hopefully I wasn't worrying about it. Okay, got it. Another question. She's like, I'm out of here. I get it. It's hotter than hell. I know. I'm so sorry. You know what I'm going to tell you? This is what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm actually into this. You guys can walk around to different rooms and you find one of my surveys for housing Oregon table. At the bottom I've written, it's hotter than Hades, it's hotter than sin. Okay, just a little of my input, because I know last year it wasn't hot, it was AC and people were complaining it was too cold, and I guarantee this is why they're throwing this at us this year, okay? I guarantee you they're like, well, they thought it was too cold last year, we're in a good mood. So anyway, let them know on the bottom of their survey too, if anything that you want to change, anything that they need to look at, they really want to know that information. And we can maybe, show you a happy medium. Okay, All right, thank you folks for being here. We appreciate you so much.